And I think, you know, it's quite an apropos title. Do we have to be in this limelight? Audrey, do we have to have these lights shining like this? Oh, okay. So everybody come down, please, because it's much nicer for questions and so on if we're together. So if you're sitting at the back, try and come forward. Leading from the Edge, which I think having the art fair in Australia is really an apropos title, in the sense that we were once considered, not so much anymore, to be very much on the edge of the art world. And we have people on the panel, SUHANYA RAFFEL, whom I'll introduce in a minute, Leo Silitonga and Matthew Nash, all of whom are participating in the art world, what was considered to be the center of the art world, from what was previously considered to be the edges. So I've got SUHANYA here, RAFFEL, who's Deputy Director of the Art Gallery of New South Wales, on my left. On my right, I've got Matthew Nash, who's from New Zealand, and Leo Silitonga from Indonesia, next to SUHANYA there. How we'll run this is I'll introduce the panelists, and then I've got a number of questions that we'll ask each panelist to respond to, and then we hope we'll involve you in questions, because the reason I want people to come down, please fill in rather than going up, is because it makes for a much better conversation if we are connected to one another physically. Matthew Nash, CLARKE, runs a gallery called the PAULNACHE Gallery in New Zealand. He runs this gallery in a provincial town on the North Island, and how he describes the gallery, and he'll describe it more, is it's a gallery in the provinces, not a provincial gallery. And I think that's quite a nice way of saying what you want to say, because nowadays you can be anywhere really and behave and operate in a very sophisticated way. The gallery started some time ago, but it changed focus. Matthew and you can talk about that. It started in 2004. It was called the Pencil Gallery, which indicates that it was about drawing, and also contemporary Maori art. You know, not quite sure how those two things came together. And then in 2009, it became the Paul Nash Gallery. I'm not sure how Paul Nash and you were connected, Matthew, but you can answer when you talk. What the gallery seems to focus on are underappreciated artists, the importance of community, which is something that I believe in, and I know SUHANYA believes in very deeply, and I think, Leo, you believe in too, from what the bit of research that I've done, in the sense that, you know, art can be seen as something for a group of in-house people, or it can involve a community that goes far further. And Matthew certainly wants to foster not only the connectivity with the outside world, but with the local community. Subversion, well, if you look at his age, or guess at his age, I think that's right. And although you can be subversive at an older age as well, it becomes harder as you get older, I think. And he also believes in artists and the gallerists working together. Well, in my experience as a commercial gallerist, you have to work together. Otherwise, it doesn't work. If you're simply the sort of boss and they are seen as the employees in some way, it doesn't work. It's not that kind of relationship. So how to successfully lead from the edge, we'll ask Matthew in a minute, and then let's move on to Leo. Leo is an architect by training, am I right, Leo? That's what it said on the Google. Okay.
Actually, my undergrad was architecture, and I got my MBA from the States.
That's right. Yeah. Well, I was coming to the MBA. Yeah. So he started off as an architect, did his MBA, so obviously financial expertise, a collector, a patron of the arts. He's also an art fair director, the Art Jakarta, And the vernissage was just in August, a short while
Yes.
ago. Yes, and there was a Harper's Bazaar magazine that created a special edition. Leo will tell us more about that. He's also done some writing, Leo, so lots of hats. I think we all wear lots of hats, those of us who run galleries. And at the moment, or recently, he's founded a gallery and a residency project called Uma Semi.
Sunny, yeah.
Yeah. So for Leo from Indonesia, Indonesian art is obviously a focus. Now, SUHANYA in some ways doesn't need introduction, but you know, the people who don't need introduction are sometimes the people who need the most introduction, because everybody assumes they know everything about them. SUHANYA really, well, she was at the Queensland Art Gallery in various capacities, curator, deputy director, acting director, for almost 20 years. But apart from that, which most people in the art world would know, she really was, and it wasn't an easy position to occupy. She was the key person in there were others, but there was one key person, and that was SUHANYA, in the development of the whole area of contemporary Asian art. There was Doug Hall, who was the previous director of the Queensland Art Gallery, and then various directors since then. Michael Brand, now director of the Art Gallery of New South Wales, played an early role. Dr. Caroline Turner played an early role, who's now at the university in Canberra. But without SUHANYA, I can't see that area of contemporary Asian art, the contemporary art of the Asia-Pacific region, would have reached the levels that it has managed to reach in Australia, and really we were leading from the edge, or she was, or the Queensland Art Gallery was. So I think she's a core, key person in taking a town like Brisbane, which I remember as a much smaller and less sophisticated town than it is today. It's a city now. And taking an area that was not considered, you know, it wasn't not considered of interest. People didn't even know it existed. You can only not be interested in something if you know it exists. People didn't even know there were artists, contemporary artists in Asia, and turning it into the phenomenon that it's turned out to be. In America, because of this vast population and these amazing top universities, the minute they latch onto something, they feel that they have invented it. The truth is, they haven't invented this. It was invented in Australia a long time before. It's just now they are able to do it with the money and the finances and the research institutes and the a huge size of the population compared to ours in a way that we couldn't as a country, and SUHANYA worked with a minuscule budget. The collection at Queensland was built with a tiny budget, relatively tiny budget, and great relationships were formed with the artists. So this is SUHANYA. So now I want to talk, the questions are not, so that's that. The questions are not in any sort of hierarchical order. They're just as they occurred to me. So don't consider the first question the most important and so on. It's just as they occurred. And we talked about this before SUHANYA joined us a few minutes ago. Really, let's talk about the internet, and we'll start with SUHANYA because she's of the generation, like I am, although she's much younger than me, but she's of the generation who knew the art world before the internet. How do you feel the internet has changed things within this framework, SUHANYA, of leading from the edge? I mean, I did in my own tiny way, and you did on a much bigger canvas, manage to lead from the edge without the technology in the early days.
I should say with the Queensland Art Galleries project, the Asia Pacific Triennial, which is linked to a collection development impulse as well, and a deep impulse, the ability to have done that was through a network of contacts and relationships across artists, curators, writers, architects, makers of all kind. And prior to the internet, those relationships were established through personal contacts and then contacts from there. So it was rhizomatic. We did a lot of travel. And I think embedding a triennial in an institution meant that institutional individuals like myself and my colleagues had a continuity to develop those networks and make them close relationships and return, because the triennial gave you a structure of return. So every 3 years you'd go back.
Everybody here knows what the APT is, the Asia Pacific Triennial, do you? Okay,
so this is an exhibition that takes place in the Queensland Art Gallery that began, the first edition was in 1993. Jean was saying leading from the edge in Queensland, but actually Australia was engaging with contemporary Asian and Pacific art long before, the first worlds, if you like, Europe and America. And that was across Australia. In Perth, there was the Artists Regional Exchange in 1989, which was a grassroots artist-led initiative. In Adelaide, the Adelaide festivals and the Artists' Weeks that were there were very alive to that work. In Sydney, the Art Gallery of New South Wales and the MCA, early days in the 90s, had exhibitions of contemporary Chinese art, of contemporary Japanese art.
It's true, but you brought it together somehow.
Well, Queensland made that long-term commitment as an institution through the triennial to collect and to make an ongoing exhibition.
That's right.
And that gave it a certain impetus.
Yeah, it framed it in such a way that everybody focused, right?
But to go back to your question about the internet is still one tool in the toolbox. It's not the only one.
No.
And you have to continue to develop your relationships, and you have to travel and you have to meet people.
Absolutely. But now can I ask Leo, to what extent in your, Leo, describe what you're doing, because most people would know of the Queensland Art Gallery here, and I would assume many people here would know of the Asia Pacific Triennial. So not everyone will know what you've been doing. So tell us a little bit.
Okay, thank you, Jean. For the last 2 years, I've been working as the fair director of the only art fair in Jakarta, Indonesia. It's called Bazaar Art Jakarta. It's owned by Harper's Bazaar magazine, the lifestyle magazine. And these last 2 years, actually, we started open up to engage overseas galleries to participate. Previously, it has been very local. The participants are mostly from local galleries. So I also I've also engaged with Sydney Contemporary and Melbourne Art Fair as a VIP liaison, and I found it very interesting that last year, actually, when I brought some collectors to Melbourne Art Fair, actually at first we didn't know what to see in Melbourne Art Fairs, and we just some of the collectors realized that there are a lot of interesting contemporary art in Australia, and compared to what we have in Asia, it's very interesting and considered affordable.
Yes.
So it's something that is probably is even though it's internet is connecting from the edge to from the
edge to the center.
To the center, but still you need to send someone over to some place to make it more connected.
Yes. Well, this comes back to what Suhanya said, isn't it? That the internet has helped in one sense. You can get access to information immediately. But in another sense, the human relationships are just as important as they ever were. Matthew, you're really, you're not, New Zealand is far enough, but then you're not in Auckland or Wellington. So describe how you manage to lead from that edge and how your galleries become well known, even though you really are quite far away.
Well, it's
Talk loudly, though.
thank you. Well, it's a choice that I made in 2004 to open the gallery in Gisborne. So at the time, I'd come through art school and I was actually studying to be an artist.
I see.
And it wasn't until 2003, just by chance, an appointment up at Peter McLeavy's gallery to see a work by Bill Hammond at the time that had just sold to a major institution, that my inspiration came not through the work itself, but through the value that was placed on that work and what that value did for Bill Hammond, the artist at the time. In 2003, he was actually coming out of a period, he'd been producing work for a very long time, and I was inspired to see what that value and what that contextual, I suppose, validation that that institution gave to his practice. So that was the inspiration for the gallery, but at the time I was really invested into setting up an online growth of art and being able to display it. And by chance, I had a call from a person in Gisborne that had just bought a building, and they invited me up to come and have a look at it, and I took over in Gisborne.
Explain where Gisborne is.
So Gisborne is a small coastal town on the east coast of the North Island. It's as furthest east as you can get. It's a remote part of the world. It's about 6.5 hours drive from either main centre, so Auckland and Wellington. But yet it's only an hour flight, so you can jump on a plane and come to Gisborne.
And what's the population?
The population boasts 44,000 people, but the town itself exists on about 25,000 people. It is also incredibly a diverse town. Its population is 50% Māori, which is the indigenous...
50%?
It would be 50%.
That's high.
So it would almost be more than Rotorua
I see.
or somewhere like that. But it struggles. Its remoteness or its isolation keeps its beauty and its place in the world, but it also struggles to keep up financially. We're about 6 months behind everyone else in terms of the cities and what they go through. One of the things that I really loved about Gisborne was it's my sense of belonging. I know my place in the world when I'm in Gisborne, and it's a conversation that comes through a lot of artists when they're trying to discover who they are or their place, and that was one of the things that drew me initially to the contemporary Māori art movement at the time.
But did you, could you run that gallery without the internet?
It struggled at first.
But let's say you didn't have the internet.
Again, going on what SUHANYA said about the relationships and having to go to those places, that still exists, and this is why I'm here at the art fair. The internet just actually heightens that. It enables me to do it at a pace when I think something, I can communicate to someone.
Quickly.
And I can do that very quickly.
Yeah.
And the gallery to a greater extent actually runs off that network model.
I see.
And you know, today, for instance, I've met several artists. I've already communicated to them on Facebook. We've shared likes and stuff on Instagram. I've enabled myself to understand who they are through their work in only moments of time.
But if you worked with them, would you bring them to your to that remote place?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I've chosen to do is come to the art fairs to expose my artists on a global scale. But the more I push out from a small town, the more I think about what it means to come back. And I think it comes back to the community. Gisborne, I have a sort of a philosophy where I have a whānau-based philosophy. So all the gallery and the artists are actually connected and interwoven either with place or themselves. So I'm looking very short-term and long-term to set up an international artist residency from Gisborne, which would allow me to create, it would allow me to invite people like yourselves.
To come and stay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to another question now, which we've touched on, and that is the question of community. And let's start with SUHANYA. and talk about in terms of the larger community. The art world goes to art exhibitions. The professional people in the art world go to art exhibitions. You know, we're all professional people in one capacity or another, and there are many of you here. If you're a collector and you identify yourself as a collector, you'll go to galleries. If you are you know, working in a museum or in whatever capacity, even if you come from the creative group of people, like you're a graphic artist or you may be an architect or a filmmaker and so on, you're likely to make a visit at some point to some exhibitions. But what about the broader community?
Working from a public institution, you know, our obligation is to the broadest community or communities, because there are many of them, and they range from, you know, a very formal education base where there are school children and, you know, from primary all the way through to high school and then into tertiary education as one group of people. You've got your artists community, you've got your general public, then you've got range of specialist communities that come, you know, people who need special access, for example. So an institution like the Art Gallery of New South Wales has an obligation and a responsibility to make sure that the work that it does communicates across those platforms. And while you were speaking, I was thinking about a work very recently we installed as part of an exhibition called Go East, where I worked with Jean and Brian Sherman's collection of contemporary Asian art. And one of the, you know, really central pieces for that exhibition is a work by an Indian artist called Jitish Kalat. And we installed the work called Public Notice in our entrance court.
It's still there, right?
It's still there, yeah. It's the thoroughfare of the art gallery. It's our front door, and it's how you welcome people in. And part of making that work available to a broad group of people included, you know, talks like this to groups of people, but also a series of every Wednesday night the gallery is open late, and we organized a series of talks over a period of Wednesday nights called The Quiet Riot, and how a work like that can actually arc across and touch other parts of history that's also very much part of local history. So we know Charlie Perkins did his freedom rides as part of Australian history, and advocating for Aboriginal rights, and those freedom rides touched immediately on Jitish Kalat's work, Public Notice too, because that work is based on Mahatma Gandhi's 1930 Salt March speech that he delivered, which put into place the architecture of civil disobedience and the purchase of an individual's ability to make change. And so to be able to bring in, it was the anniversary actually of those freedom rides this year, and Sydney University responded to that anniversary by reenacting that ride, and to bring those people in and talk about that part of history, which is very local, very much part of Australia, within the context of a Jitish Kalat artwork, was fantastic. And that's a way of thinking about how you connect through art across a whole, you know, raft of issues that are local, that are political, that are activist, that matter.
Do you think you would have got people from the Freedom Ride days into the art gallery who mightn't have thought of going to the art gallery before?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then we had somebody like Michael Kirby come and talk about the significance and importance of public, not just Gandhi, but of public, of significant moments of public intellectual life and speech.
Yes,
you know, and
how a speech can affect our whole world, really, one speech.
Gallery, it actually takes it outside.
Absolutely. And in fact, he spoke about the first place where he encountered it was through film, and film of Shakespeare, and his father and mother introducing him to Shakespeare through cinema.
I see.
So it was a very lovely, long.
There's a Macbeth about to open, produced by Emil, my son. I'm doing a little plug. That's Shakespeare through film. Now, Leo, let's talk about community and how you've got the residencies, right? How are you reaching? I mean, the art fair is one thing, but art fairs, I don't know. Sometimes the community does come. Often they feel it's not for them because it's too specialized or they haven't got the money to buy or, you know, they feel as though they're not part of that world. How do you feel? Do you want to reach out into the community? And how can you do it?
Okay. Actually, how I, you know, my Umasani trying to reach out to the community is okay. Nowadays, there are a lot of artists. They don't even know the good things about having a relationship between artist and gallery.
They don't know what the relationship is.
They don't even know what's good in it, but you know, and then also they thought that gallery, without gallery, they can manage to
on their own.
On their own, and that's kind of things actually. So we're trying to make them understand that the importance of the good the infrastructures in art, that you need this relationship between an artist, gallery, and collectors. You know, because
and also museums.
Exactly,
yes.
exactly. Because I have to admit that we don't have proper museum in Indonesia, not like in Australia. Or we're hoping that next year there will be one private museum that is going to a proper private museum that's going to be opened up next year. This private museum, they hired someone from curators from Guggenheim to
who was in Australia before, Thomas Berghaus.
Thomas Berghaus,
yes.
So and then that's the thing that we are trying to engage to the we're trying to engage the art, especially the artists, that the importance of that infrastructures. So because a lot of artists still think that galleries, making a lot of money.
They think that, yes.
They give back to, they cut a lot of money from the artists, but they don't really know that actually the gallery actually using that money to promote the artists to, for bigger, broader promotions. So actually that's the things that we are trying to, mostly they're trying to
achieve.
Yeah.
I think one thing that this little conversation has told me, and I hope you and, people view things differently and hear things differently, of course they do, is that, different countries and places are not only at different stages, because what Leo is talking about, most Australian artists would understand. Wouldn't you say, and New Zealand artists, that there is an ecology, that you have the artists in the studio, you have the commercial galleries, and there are people in the audience here who run commercial galleries, and you know how hard you work. I did it, and I know how hard I worked. And then if you're lucky, you've got the museums, you have the art schools, who feed in on the one side, you have the art magazines who play a role on the other side, you have independent critics, which is not the same as just paying people to write articles, who do it for the money, whether they're interested in the artist or not. So there's a big difference between a writer who is given $1,000, I'm just making up the amount now, to write an article on an artist and who writes. And a person who says, I don't care what I'm paid, this is the artist I want to write on or that. So these are different levels of an ideal, if you like, ecology that needs to operate in a balanced way if the whole system is to operate in the way we would like it to operate, really. And Leo's first task, it seems from what he said, is to tell us about how to explain to the artist that if you just wing it on your own, it doesn't always work. On the other hand, the Chinese artists who were so oppressed by the Cultural Revolution and the, strictures that they lived under, Mao Zedong, and so on, as creative people, they had to serve the nation, serve the state. They were basically propaganda, part of a big propaganda machine. They didn't want galleries at the end because they felt frightened to be overly directed. So what, Suhanya, can you say about those Chinese artists that you've worked with who wanted to do it all themselves?
Well, I have to say they were very successful.
They were, and I think that's, so the ecology probably isn't that important, or maybe it is, I don't know.
I mean, many of them talk about the Cultural Revolution in very different ways. It's fragmented and sharply violent experience, I think, in that 10-year period. But what they also learned, I think, underneath it all was that the magnitude of possibility was also a real thing that they learned. I mean, if you look at someone like Sai Kuo-chang, he was part of a propaganda art unit. And he says one of the reasons why he's able to make big work is because that was the work he did. He was trained in early. Yeah. And so had the capability and the understanding of working in scale. Yes. So, that's a very practical example of what...
But he fled to Japan, right?
He did, absolutely. And continues to work independently of a dealer structure, but very successfully and efficiently in an international, global environment. And I think the Chinese artists have been, very successful at doing it. I think the other thing to say is that they had a group of very clear advocates, curators, like Han Ru and Wu Hong, who went out there, and
Gao Minglu,
all of them who worked. And they were also always willing to work together as a group of artists, as Chinese artists. And not all artists are interested in being nation-bound in that way. So,
that's a very insightful comment, I think. Yes.
But they, but they're agile as well.
They were flexible, but they were willing to be seen as a group for as long as it served a purpose. Yeah.
I was thinking, the title "Leading from the Edge," and what does that mean? And I was thinking of it as a bubble of water, or a really, really, really fat bubble of water before it breaks. And in the end, the edge, that's what the edge is. It's much better to be on the edge, frankly.
Well, the edge has become the center, and the center has gone to the edge now. But I'd like your thoughts on that, Matthew. I mean, would those artists that you're working with, and in such a sort of close-knit community, do you think without you they could formulate a vision and activate it and reach the outer world in the way that you try to enable them to do? Could they be independent?
Well, when you talk about my group of artists, there's the group of artists that I work with to represent in the gallery, but I actually work with a lot more artists than just that. So within the community, there's also the contemporary Māori art school, Toiho Kura, and like what you said with the Chinese artists, they actually moved as a group, and they've done so since the 90s with groups of people. I used to represent an artist called John Bevan Ford, and he at the time didn't adopt a dealer model. He was against the model, and he toured his work with a group of other Māori artists around the Pacific Rim well before I came about. And it was something that they did to actually expose what they had learnt through the practice and through observation in the marae, and people like PAULNACHE and Cliff Whiting and those artists, and then they'd given hope to a culture to be able to take it beyond New Zealand, to be able to expose what they were learning, but to a greater audience.
But were they successful? To a
Well,
point.
well, they were successful enough to establish a movement, which is now considered and somewhat ordained by the institutions and the museums within New Zealand. We've got a great contemporary Pacific and Māori art collection throughout New Zealand, and in particular even in Gisborne there's a small provincial museum that supports that type of art.
Are they named individually though, or is it like the group of Maori artists under?
What are we talking about?
In terms of...
Is it within the 70s?
No, this was, well, there was, under Gordon Tovey, there was a group of artists that were formed. And they were the first ones to actually go into the marae and look at the...
Explain what the marae is.
So a marae in New Zealand is a traditional Māori meeting house or meeting place, but it's more than that as well. It's got an ethereal sense. It's a place of community. It's a place of family and belonging, and it's a place that you can track your lineage through your ancestry and knowledge. And in contemporary Māori art, that lineage had come through the spoken word or through performance art, and then it was adopted into the visual art form. And at that time, there was not a lot of that outside of the marae, so there was a group of artists that were put together that actually exposed beyond the marae. So they had taken it and looked on that global scale. But the thing that I'm interested in from Gisborne and talking about community, I have to sort of blur the lines between a private commercial space that supports my artists financially and then a public gallery. So historically there's no other gallery in that area, and there hadn't been. So I have to educate Gisborne, I suppose, or the population of Gisborne and people that pass through that town about what it is that I'm actually doing and who it is that I support. And it can work really interesting, like something like this. It feeds that model that you were talking about, Leo, about the description about how, you know, the gallery and the artist work together with the collector. When you do go through that, and something happens where you find these collectors and well, they find you actually, because you've been doing it for a longer time than when they discover you. It just enables you to actually do something bigger. It fuels the artist. It actually gives them confidence to say that, you know, this is something good. They understand my language. And
well, if you're a bridging person, you become a kind of interpreter, don't you?
you do, yeah.
But I mean, SUHANYA and I, who have worked a lot with Chinese artists, really do realize, Leo, which is a strange thing, that these artists, because of their history, and in a way, I mean, they just could not give themselves up to a partnership. Trust had been lost in the past. They, you know, there was that famous moment with Mao Zedong in history in the 50s, mid-50s, where he said, anybody who wants to criticize or make a suggestion about what we're doing with the communist government, let 100 flowers bloom, it was called, raise your voice. And when he heard a lot of criticism, which is what he asked for, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people were either killed or sent to the Gulag. So people who had gone through that, or whose parents had gone through that, and much worse, had, well, how much worse can it get? But, you know, had gone through things like that, did not want to put trust in a partnership, however beneficial it could be, Leo. And it is beneficial. I mean, I've been in it, and I know how much we did and how much we added. But nevertheless, there was that hesitancy, and yet they managed. Can we move on, though? We don't want to get locked into this. and just talk about the importance of, and we'll start with SUHANYA again, with biennales, triennales, art fairs. You know, how has that sort of added to the leading from the end, to the people? Remember when we started, or certainly when I started, I think there were 3 art fairs in the world, and there were maybe 3 or 4 biennales. There was Venice,
Sydney.
There was Sao Paulo, and there was Sydney.
Sydney.
And now, I don't know how
Many more.
hundreds. So it's a very change. So is it, how has that changed the edge and the center dynamic?
Well, I think when you look at, say, Sydney Biennale, now coming up to 40 years, when it was initiated, it was about bringing the international to the local, because there was the opportunity was so limited. And then I know when the Asia Pacific Triennial started 20 years later in 1993, that particular exhibition, the Triennial, became a forum for the region to meet, because there weren't any others. But in the span of 20 years, since that first Triennial, within the region, as you said, there's a Jakarta art fair now, let alone the biennales that have sprung right across the region. So in many ways, I think it's about measuring the health of an art world, that it's, and that it's very active, it's very dynamic, and it's making its own way in all of those places. I don't think it's bad. I just think
but can people get to everything? There's so many. I'm playing devil's advocate now.
I think perhaps they don't. Everybody doesn't need to go to
everywhere. No.
And that the triennial or the biennial or the art fair services an important local ecology that then touches on areas of the world in whatever form it takes.
We'll let Leo and Matthew speak, and then I think it's time for you to ask questions. So, Leo, I mean, you've already described how important this art fair has been. I didn't realize that Harper's Magazine actually supported it. I thought, yes, so that's an unusual thing for them to do. Yes. Why would they want to do it, Leo?
Well, actually, Harper's Bazaar, they, well, I'm not trying to promote the
no.
magazine or anything, but they do have what they call it a bazaar art magazine.
Yes.
So it's a lifestyle, but more emphasis in art.
I see.
Yeah. So that's one of the major reasons why, Harper's Bazaar as a magazine back up the art fair.
Yes.
But I'm trying to relate to response to what
SUHANYA said,
saying that regarding the Sydney Biennale. Like next year, we heard that they're going to be the first Indonesian artist that's going to be in one of the participants of the Biennale. So some of us actually, there are a lot of Indonesians who are so excited, want to go to the Biennale. So, and then of course, that's not going to be the Indonesians, but the Philippines and some of the Southeast Asians, because they want to see one of their artists going to be in the big 5 biennales in the world, such as Sydney Biennale. So, and it's a good way to for us, for Southeast Asian, to be exposed to more into Australian contemporary art. Yeah, it's I was so excited to see what's going on.
So, do you think a lot of people will come?
Oh yes,
definitely.
Yeah, especially I heard that APT is going to be. The end of APT is overlapping, so it's wonderful.
Yes, people are coming to both.
Exactly,
yes.
Yeah.
And you, Matthew, do you get around to the biennales? I mean,
well,
it's expensive.
It is
It's
expensive.
Yeah.
But you know, that's what you said. You can't go to everything. I think, you know, for me, I have to be very strategic. So for this exercise at Sydney, I've chosen to collaborate with 4 artists. One that's been a long time in New Zealand, who's based in Mumbai, and I've worked with Sanjay Theodore for about 7 or 8 years now. Matthew Cooper, a New Zealand artist, currently based in Las Vegas. and he's immigrated there in 2010.
To Las Vegas.
Las Vegas, yeah,
That's
the
a
Capitalist
surprise.
Society of New Zealand, of America, sorry. Peter Adset, he was born in Gisborne, but he spent the last 25 years in Australia. And then Glenn Hayward, who's just come back from a residency in Switzerland, given to him by the Wallace Art Trust,
I see.
who lives in New Zealand. So all these artists that I'm working with here actually adopt an international framework anyway.
I see.
And it's about bringing them to Sydney to even further extend that,
Yes.
and hopefully open up the dialogue not only to this market of the art fair,
Yeah.
but to an international audience of curators.
And the curators and the
museums.
writers
That's
and
correct.
everybody else. But you didn't bring them, they came themselves.
I invited them, yeah.
Oh, you invited
Yeah,
them. Did
yeah.
they pay for themselves? did
3
they-
out of 4 came
Came.
with me, and I also invited, there was a dozen patrons that I work with quite closely, including Sir James Wallace from the Wallace Arts Trust, and
see.
Fiona Campbell,
I
who runs
see.
the Real Art Roadshow.
Oh, well,
So they all come with me, and it's about, it's that collaboration between
Yes.
the artist, the curator, and the gallery.
Yeah.
But not often does the patron or the person supporting the artist actually have that experience at an art fair.
No.
So
It's
it's
a very
about
lovely
exposing them.
model there, and I think an ambitious one to pull off, which Matthew's clearly done. How much longer? We've got about 15 minutes. Where is Audrey? Is that right, Audrey? All right. Now, guys, this is your turn. We've talked enough. So come on. Come up with questions, and we'll do our best to answer them.
Thank you for the talks. I'm just wondering how the proliferation of the art fairs has affected the galleries that promote them.
Say that again.
How has the proliferation of art fairs affected the galleries that promote the artists?
How does it affect
Yes,
the gallery?
yes. Has it, I mean, there's been a lot of gallery closures. I know
Yes.
that. Is that because just the economic climate, or is that because art fairs are showing more artists outside the galleries?
Well, I think I can answer that a little bit, and that is, I mean, Matthew's given the most brilliant answer. I've never heard of anybody doing quite what you're doing, Matthew, bringing these artists, bringing the patrons, bringing the collectors, and everybody sort of traveling together, and in, such an enhanced experience. But in my experience as a commercial gallerist and art, there were far fewer art fairs, but it's an enormously expensive thing to do, to go to an art fair. In my day, I like to put numbers on things. It cost us to go, this is a long time ago, right, to go to Chicago or to go to Asia. We went to some failed fairs in Asia. In other words, they fairs that started, but they didn't sustain themselves. It cost 100,000 Australian dollars then, because you've got the booth, you've got the flights, you've got the staff, you've got hotels, you're not in your own town, you've got to eat, the whole package cost $100,000, and you've got 4 days. So, and you're running your gallery at the same time. The expenses don't disappear. So in a way, I found it a very difficult and demanding experience, and I personally didn't like it. But,
It's kind of what I was meaning was that, it must be such an expensive thing to do that and run a gallery and promote artists all
it's
at the
very
same time.
I found it very difficult. But I feel, I didn't live through the internet age so much. It was at the end of my commercial gallery, that period, that, I think it would have been easier if we had had the technology. Because I found, you would sit in the booth, you would have 100 people coming at you. I'm exaggerating slightly, but say 20 people in the booth at once. You'd paid God knows what for that booth. You didn't know who was the person who was going to buy. You didn't have the technology, so you couldn't say, just give me this and I'll send you an image. So you had to scramble around for your, for your slides or your catalogs or your brochures. It was just like it was a madhouse. But here, it doesn't feel like a madhouse from the outside, so I don't know.
It's fine-tuned, I think. But there is
What do you
a...
think, Matthew?
Well, it depends how you place that value on it. You know, you're talking about a financial value to come to an art fair. But the connections, you know, like I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for people like Barry Caldulis, Dr. Dick Kwan and Sue Cato that support what I'm doing at these fairs and how that actually juxtapose the actual fair itself. My artists are actually, we have a very strong curatorial focus to what we design at these art fairs. So these things have developed over a year of dialogue and conversation, and bringing those collectors into that engagement as well is really crucial and important.
Lucky collectors,
well,
huh?
well, gone are the days of also, like, when I learnt this very quickly because I had to, you know, for instance, last year I was at the Melbourne Art Fair in the booth behind Anna Swartz, and how do you compete with that? You know, like, I'm a small gallery from Gisborne that I had to keep explaining it wasn't Brisbane. But it's also a really interesting sort of topic to start a dialogue. The art fair for me, like this year, if you come into the booth, which is A05, for those of you who haven't been there, it's more important for me about making that connection and getting those details. So I haven't adopted a print one. I don't tend to give away things for free. I want your details. I need your details to survive. So I have a postcard. That postcard that you may take may be sent to someone else that may be
No, you never know.
And I have an online catalogue, so you can interact with an iPad.
No,
and
that's where the technology...
Yeah, and I adopted this a day before I came here because I thought that people are more engaged in technology now than ever, and it's been working. People are actually looking at the iPad and going through the catalogue, and it's doing my job for me.
That's right. Well, I really do feel strongly about that part. Leo, you answer.
Yes. I just want to share what's going on in Asia. I think art fair in Asia is the answer for the problem that all galleries are facing, the increasing of the rental. You know, it's now rental fee, rental cost is very expensive in Singapore, in Hong Kong. And then there were a lot of galleries having branches, like Philippine galleries have branches in Singapore, or a Singapore gallery has branches in KL or Jakarta. Now they close down the branches and they are just maintain their galleries in their hometown. And art fair is the answer for them to making more connections.
Yes.
When Jean shared that it's going to cost a lot of money, but if they compare to what they have to pay a yearly basis for having a branch in some other country, it's much cheaper.
Oh, no question.
Yes.
No question. And some people are closing their galleries altogether and just moving. SUHANYA, from a curatorial, and I forgot to mention, SUHANYA is Deputy Director at the Art Gallery of New South Wales now, so I talked about Queensland. But from a curatorial and a museum perspective, there are a lot of curators at this art fair and museum directors.
Yes.
Why? Why do they come?
I mean, the thing that an art fair does is it congregates it all in one place. So it's, you know, you get to see a lot in a period of 3 days, in a very short time. And it's quite intense work, but it's very, again, a very efficient way
it's practical
and
efficient.
And you're getting to see people and meet people from, you know, from the region, and because they've all come. And in that sense, that's why one goes to art fairs, why a curator or a gallery director
It's the
goes.
same as a biennale in a
Yes,
sense. It's a gathering moment where people come. What's the word when you say, I fear missing out on something? You know, there's a kind of, there's an acronym. What is it?
BOMO.
And what does it stand for? A fear of missing out. I have a fear of missing out. So there are all these art fairs and biennales. I wanted to go to Istanbul. I even booked and then I couldn't go. And I am devastated that I've missed out. So it's one of the things that you know, you feel, oh God, I can't afford or I haven't got the time. I'm missing out.
That's the use of technology. You can go, this is streaming live on,
exactly.
on the website.
Exactly.
But the art fair has to also realise that, you know, as big as it grows and as important as it is in this market, that the gallery needs to survive, because there's artists that have a practice that exist in a gallery model. They can't get through a period of their work without having that critical dialogue in the gallery space itself.
Well,
over an art fair, you've only got 4 days to actually do something, and those artists that actually look and observe their own work to get to that next stage in their career, they need those galleries to survive that. So
I hear what you're saying. Any more questions? Yes. No, do it with the microphone, because otherwise no one will hear you.
It was sort of a question and a comment, but maybe I'm sort of a bit active on Facebook in terms of following galleries and artists and collectors. And just Pearl Lamb, who's here with her gallery, she travels extensively, and it's just been fascinating, the photos she's been posting of the art fairs and her travels throughout Australia. So just thought, for me, just to let you know, as someone who likes to collect or collects a little bit, I just think that's just such a wonderful way to reach out to people.
For a collector, no
yeah, like when
question.
you said that FOMO, like sometimes I feel like even just recently people have been in Istanbul and they've been posting photos, and it was just fascinating to see. So I think that's where Facebook has been just really valuable.
No, from the visitors to the fair, I was talking from the galleries in the fair, so I can see very easily. How many, where are we, Audrey? 5 minutes, so 1 or 2 more questions depending. Here's a question.
Thank you. I was just wondering, Instagram is so sort of fresh and so important, lots of people are using it, so that the visual image is available to click to millions of people, and photos are uploaded millions of times a day. So everyone's getting their feast of visual pictures very quickly. Is that helping or hindering a gallery as, say, a potential provider of good photographs? So are people satisfied by what they get off their iPad, or does it stimulate them to go into a gallery and go to the next step?
Well, I'm too out of date to answer that. So,
well, it does,
Matthew?
It is really important, and one of the things that I've been doing for the last 7 years in 5 art fairs, my 5th art fair. This is the biggest international stage. But I work with a young photographer named Tom Tudenberg, and he actually comes with me. And the image is incredibly important. I remember when I first started Instagram several years ago, and taking it off your phone, and quite quickly realised that that image wasn't good enough for the artist. It wasn't good enough for the work to do it justice. So working with professional photographers and videographers and things like that is essential. And Instagram is just a platform. So there's a number of social networks and stuff that you do. Like, for instance, the woman that follows on Facebook, I wonder if you're on my Facebook feed. I'm posting about 100 images a day as well. But that's the engagement. If you're not there, you want to feel like you understand what's happening, and to see other people that are passionate about those things, and then become part of the conversation. It's really easy for someone that you may not have met before to like a photograph and then to comment and start a dialogue, good or bad or other. It's that engagement through those social networks. Instagram's quite good. I know that a lot of people now don't have websites, and they've chosen to use the platform of Instagram to expose their art, and that's their sole thing. It's like the website now is just like a big ugly CV that you'd probably have to, you have to be pointed to go there, and then you've got screeds and screeds of information to go through. Whereas Instagram, I might post an image and it beeps in your pocket, and you're immediately alerted to what's going on in the present sense. So yeah, Instagram is but
I
it's
use
a
it
tool
too.
again. Yeah.
All the
Because in the
museum
end,
shows.
the object, we all love our art.
Yes.
And they are things in space, and they're not that little picture on your,
No, it's hard.
On
to-
your
it's a bigger experience.
My feeling in running the gallery, the commercial gallery, when I closed in 2007 and started the foundation, is that when the technology started, the visitor numbers came down. It didn't mean, though, that the sales went down or that the interest went down, but the numbers of people walking through the door went down. So I'm not sure how to interpret that. People emailed and said, I want to know more about this or that, or I think this links with that, but they didn't, as many people did not make the trip to park and come to the gallery. Look, I think, Audrey, we better stop, or should we do one more question? All right, should we do one more and try and get something that Leo can answer?
Thanks. Leah, I was just wondering what you thought in relation to everything about Instagram. I know that I personally access a lot of Indonesian, Southeast Asian artists through Instagram and have been able to meet with them and work with them that way. And you mentioned that next year will be the first time that Indonesian artists will be in the Sydney Biennale. So how do you work with that and respond to that in order to get Indonesian work out into Australia and the rest of the world?
Okay. It's all right. Okay. It's just happened that the artists that gonna be participated in Sydney Biennale is quite popular among the Southeast Asian, because the artist that's gonna be in APT happened to won Sovereign Art Prize, if I'm not mistaken, in Singapore Art Museum. And then the artist that is gonna be in Sydney Biennale is an artist that has been exhibited all over Asia. So Southeast Asia is they tend to support each other. And even though it's an Indonesian artist that's gonna be participated in APT or Sydney Biennale, the rest the other countries collectors going to support it as well. So and it's two events at the same time. We're not gonna miss it. APT and it's Triennale and Biennale, of course. It's just like Documenta and what was it? Venice Biennale.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, nobody wants to miss it. So it's gonna be a very interesting event in Sydney next year. So yeah. Is it answer my?
All right, I think
question?
we could go on, but everyone's got another life. So I think we should thank the panel. I think they've been amazing. And thanks for coming, guys. Enjoy the fair.
Thank you, Jean.
Pleasure. You too.